everyone, my name is Zach REDRUP, this is the It's Not a Phase podcast, and on this episode I'm joined by Tom Weaver, who is the vocalist for the recently returned Welsh band Casey. We talk all about their recent reunion, how it all came to be, what he and the other members have been up to during their breakup, returning to touring, their new song Great Grief, what's planned for the future, and loads more. Now, if you enjoyed this or any other episode of the podcast and you want to show your support, there's a few ways that you can do that. Number one, leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. It takes just a few seconds and it really does help. Number two, share this on your social media, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever. Or number three, if you want to go the extra mile, you can pay a little bit each month to join the Patreon, and in return you'll get access to episodes early along with some other perks. Or you can pick up some merch from the store. All the links to that and the podcast socials where you can follow us can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. And now with all that out of the way, let's jump right into this week's episode of It's Not a Phase. What's up everybody? Thanks for joining me on this episode of It's Not a Phase, where I'm joined by Tom Weaver of Casey. How are you doing, man?
I'm very good, mate. How are you?
Yep, all good, thanks, mate. All good. Looking forward to Christmas and having some time off work.
I don't know what that feels like. I've worked Christmas Day for the last, I want to say 7 years. And that's across three different jobs. I've just worked Christmas Day every year.
Have you got it off this year, or is it another year of...
I think I'm technically on call for Christmas, so I don't have to actively do anything. But if anything breaks with my job, then I have to be on hand to help. But yeah, no like active responsibility this year, thankfully.
Well, that's good. That's we're halfway there, I guess. Halfway off.
Yeah.
What have you got planned for Christmas? Anything fun?
I'm not much of a celebrator, to be honest. I'm the same with like birthdays and stuff. I think that's like why I've never really had much of a problem with working Christmas, is that if I weren't working, I wouldn't be doing anything particularly out of the ordinary anyway. I'll probably just play some League of Legends or something. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough, man. Yeah, I mean, Christmas isn't for everybody, is it? But it's just nice to have time off, isn't it? So obviously the big news is Casey is back, and the return came pretty unexpectedly. At least for me, it was unexpected. I know that there's a lot to talk about, but before we dig into this new chapter that started, what have you been up to for the past few years since Casey, called it a day?
Nothing particularly interesting, to be honest. I mean, obviously there was like the limitations of a global crisis that kept me indoors for a lot of it. Obviously my medical history is fairly well documented throughout Casey's lifetime, but me, my brother, and my dad are all in like the critical risk category. So like we were on like extreme lockdown from the word go. So like, yeah, I spent a lot of it just in the house doing nothing. I had a proper job at a bank for a long time. And then just over a year ago, I stopped doing that. And then what else did I do? I mean, I like shortly after the band came to a close, I moved city. I moved down to Swansea in Southwest Wales. I got into a relationship. I got engaged. So I was living with her. And then, yeah, I was working at a bank, literally just working from home the way through the pandemic. So right. my routine 6 days a week was just get out of bed, walk into my study, work for 8 hours while under the microscope of a corporate machine. Then I'd go downstairs, I'd cook, and then I'd go back to my study. I'd play video games for an hour or two, and then I'd go to bed. And that was literally it, like 6 days a week. And then obviously the world started opening up again a bit. I got super miserable in my job, so I ended up changing jobs. And now I work for a super fun company who are really flexible and cool, which was nice. I ended up separating from my partner and moving back up to where I lived previously. That was June of this year. Right. And then shortly after that, by pure coincidence, Liam messaged me and was like, hey man, we've been like playing around with some music together. Would you want to listen to it and see if you wanted to do anything? And I was like, have you just messaged me because I've gone through a breakup, or like is this preordained? Like, is this premeditated? And it wasn't. It was by pure coincidence, because I hadn't actually told anyone at that point that I'd broken up with my partner. And then, yeah, that's like sort of where, that was like July-ish. That's where we started like messing around with bits and pieces, or like kicking around the idea that we might want to do something again. And then when the band came to a close, they were like, I think it was naturally coming to a place where we knew that we were moving apart from one another, but I think it was for very different reasons across the board. So although there was a level of like mutuality in us wanting to call it a day, it definitely wasn't unanimous, and it definitely wasn't like equal like across the spectrum. There was definitely like, I mentioned this in the email that I sent out last week, but it was, there were definitely like questions that were left unanswered, and like there were conversations that we should have had that we didn't. And it meant that sort of everything came to like, even though there was 6 months between us saying that we were going to stop being a band and us actually stopping being a band. So we announced it in the November. We played our last show in the May. Even though there was like a pretty expansive length of time between those 2 points, it meant that it still felt as if it came to an end quite abruptly. And then post that final show, it really, really dropped off quite quickly. So between then, I mean, there were a couple of weeks period where there was like the final merch orders and stuff that needed to be sent out. But as soon as all that was done, that was truly like a full stop on the whole thing. And like, we definitely stopped socializing as much as we would have previously. And then, like I said, I moved city. And then within 6 months, we were in nationwide lockdown and we like didn't see each other then for like 2.5 years. So then when we started playing around with this idea that, you know, we might want to write some music again, or we might want to kind of perform some songs again, or whatever we wanted to end up doing, we were like, right, before that happens, we need to make sure that like everyone's good, like everyone's on the same page, we're all comfortable being in very close quarters for extended periods of time again, because if there's any sort of, I don't want to use the word resentment because I don't think that's the correct word, but if there's any sort of like ill will there at all to any degree, it's only going to exacerbate over time, and it's going to cause fissures, and it's going to make things really uncomfortable. So I was like, we need to make sure that we're starting off from a truly blank slate. We need to have some difficult conversations and like make sure that we've like made amends and like we've sort of cleared the air with one another. So that was what happened through a lot of like August time, just because, you know, we're all adults. We've all got busy personal lives. So it took us a little while to, and we were in no rush to come back to it, right? It wasn't as if, oh my God, we need to do this immediately. It was definitely like, if we're going to do it, we want to do it for the correct reasons, and we want to make sure that we're doing it properly and that we're doing it in a healthy and sustainable way. So we had those conversations through like August, and then it was sort of early September when we started saying, actually, this feels really positive. Like it was the first time around then that we got into a practice room together and we kind of ran through the old songs dreadfully. Like the first time we practiced, it was
a little bit rusty.
Oh God, it was so bad. But at the same time, it felt really nice to be in a room together, and it felt really nice to be performing together again. So that's the point at which we kind of solidified, right, let's get a plan together. Let's get some shows booked. Let's get back in touch with the label, with Hassel, because we knew that if we were going to do anything again, we were still under contract with them. So whether we wanted to or not, we would need to let them know. But we've always had a really positive and kind of amicable relationship with them. So we wanted to make them aware as soon as we possibly could. And then, off the back of that, they were like, let's get some shows booked. Let's just see how things go. Let's do everything as independently as we can starting out. So we have no booking representation, very little PR. We were like, let's just sort of see how things go, see where the chips fall, and then we'll use that as a basis to kind of shop around and work from after the fact. Now that's sort of led us to here.
To where we are, yeah. Well, I mean, it's right I think it's obviously the right thing that you've done there, where, you know, you guys all want to make sure you're on the same page. You're all comfortable with what Casey is going to be in this next chapter. Because, I mean, you alluded to it in the email that you sent out as well, that, you know, and you've said it to me a couple of minutes ago then, that you've all got your own responsibilities, and, you know, lives are different now to where they were when Casey was originally around. You might not be able to tour and commit as much, and, you know, you need to make sure that everyone in the band is like aware of that and happy with that. And you don't want to start the band up again and then, you know, something's kind of like bubbling on the surface for you to then, I don't know, part ways again in X amount of months. Yeah,
exactly. That was it. We were like, if we're going to come back to it, and if we want to come back to it in like from the position that this isn't just a one-off, or this isn't a flash in the pan kind of thing, then we need to make sure that, like I said, it's sustainable. It's something that we're happy to commit to for a kind of an extended period of time, under the kind of the proviso that we need to be sensible about how much we can commit to. We need to make sure that obviously we're not detrimentally impacting our personal lives. And it was like I said, there were some difficult conversations to be had to make sure that everyone was on the same page and had the same sorts of expectations set of one another, to make sure that, like I said, I think resentment is the right turn of phrase in that sense, whereby, for example, I know that I'm a lot more flexible professionally than Liam is, for example, because he's worked at his company for a really long time. He is in a managerial position of an IT company, and he can't work from home. He can't just be like, oh, you know, I can check in for 2 or 3 hours a day off the road and like tour as much as I want. And then on top of that, he has 2 children. You know, he's got a mortgage. So, you know, there are realistic like adult limitations that we have in our lives now that weren't present as much back then. I mean, ironically, Liam's worked for the same company since we broke up to now, so technically he's in a very similar position to he was. But I mean, he has even more responsibility now because he's higher up in his company. He's bought a house. He's had a second kid. And all of us have that sort of thing, right? Toby's bought a house. Max has had a child, and like
real life shit.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and then there's me with my fake job and living back at my parents' house and having as much flexibility as I want and being like, yeah, I can tour 200 days a year, but like, we needed to be comfortable with like how much each of us could commit to it, and then kind of agree that we would sort of work with the lowest common denominator, right? That we'd be comfortable to commit to it to that level, and that would be enough to satisfy us, and we were. So that was good.
Yeah, as long as like you're happy that if you're all on the same page and you're all happy that whatever this status of Casey is going forward, whether that be, if it was just a one-off show or just one-off tour or whatever it may be, or you do or don't write new music, like you say, you've got to make sure that everyone is actually happy with what the overall agreement is with everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, obviously you've announced now that you're back, and I can only imagine, the level of the love has just kind of flooded in. I've seen on social media the kind of stuff that's come in, and I just can't imagine like how overwhelming that must be, especially when you've been gone for 3-4 years now, and the love is still there, the support is still there. How have you been finding it?
It's an interesting one because, I mean, I've always notoriously undersold things a lot. And like I've always set very low expectations, probably lower than most. And I would call that realism, and other people would call me pessimistic. But coming back to this especially because, like I said, after the band came to a close, I very much detached from like creativity and from music. And obviously, again, due to the pandemic, I wasn't going to shows. I wasn't hanging out with my music friends anymore. So when we were talking about coming back to this, and when we started kind of practicing and when we started booking shows, we had no real read on how relevant we still were, how many people gave a shit. We had no idea what the reaction was going to be like. And we were very, as a result, I think, quite conservative in our sort of expectations about how this was all going to go. Even up as far as like, so I mean, last Monday, we made the first sort of major teaser. It's when we started like really putting things out there that there might be something happening ahead of the full announce on the Thursday. Even up as far as that point, I was like, we might put this post up and it might get 50 likes and we might absolutely shit ourselves and like cancel the shows, like we might decide that this is an awful idea and we might pull the plug on the whole thing. And obviously that wasn't the case, and it's been really nice. And like,
yeah, I think you're going to sell more than 50 tickets, so don't worry about that.
Funnily enough, last Thursday when we made the announce, we obviously put as part of that the tickets were going on sale yesterday, and that pre-sale yesterday, general sale today. And that's sort of a lie because the Manchester show leaked. If you went on C-Tickets last Thursday, for about 6 hours, you could buy tickets. But obviously no one, like, it wasn't announced anywhere. It wasn't put in any like newsletters or anything. So you had to have been looking for it to find it. We ended up selling about 30 tickets before tickets actually went on sale. But then that got taken down. But but it means we sold 7% of a venue before the show was technically advertised, which was
not many bands can do that. So
yeah, exactly. So yeah, we were like, I was, like I said, I'm generally very, very reserved in my expectation setting, and I was really sort of trying to temper my optimism going into it. I really didn't want to be in the position whereby, and this goes back as far as like even booking the shows, right? So when we were talking to the label and we were saying, do we want to ask around to see if an agent wants to take this on? Do we want to do it ourselves? And we decided that we were going to try and do it independently as a sort of social proof that there's still life in the band and that we're still of value to an agent if we did want to shop around for one, right? No, the shitty corporate side of music. But we were talking about what venue should we book? And as part of that, the label were like, oh, well, we'll do 1,000 cap in London. And I was like, no, we won't. Like, absolutely not. Are you insane?
Especially, I guess like the idea of, 3 years of like absence. I guess that the thought of 1,000 people turn up.
Yeah, that's it. Daunting, I was like, and then like in my head, because I'll catastrophize to the end of the earth. And in my head, I was like, yeah, fine. Well, we'll book out like, what's the vet like? Heaven. There's a venue in London called Heaven, which is about 1,000 capacity. I was like, yeah, we'll book Heaven, and 18 people will show up, and then we'll look like dickheads, like. So, and then they were like, it'll be fine. And I was like, it will not be fine. Book a smaller venue. For the love of God, I'm going to have a panic attack. And then they emailed, we work with a German promoter who covers the southwest of Germany, predominantly like Cologne and the surrounding areas. His name's Dieter Bax. He runs Positive Records in Germany. And I think he's put on every show that Casey's been a part of in that area. Like, we've worked with him for as long as we've been a band. Super, super lovely dude, and really, really knowledgeable. He's been putting on shows for years and years and years and years and years. And we emailed him. We were like, look, Casey, you're planning on playing some shows again. Would you be interested in putting a show on? Do you have any recommendations for venue? Like, this is the time frame that we need to play a show in, because Max's wife is actually having a second child in February-ish time. Right. So it meant that we wanted to leave enough of a buffer before that, and also then a buffer afterwards, because obviously we don't want Ashley to be giving birth and then Max to be fucking off playing drums like a week later or anything.
Yeah.
So we were like, look, we need to play shows first half of January. Do you have any availability? Do you have a recommendation for venue? Like, let's chat. And he was like, oh, yeah, we can book Turbine Hall in Oberhausen. And I was like, what's the capacity on Turbine Hall, Bax? And he was like, oh, you played it on Impericon Festival. It's 1,800. And I was like,
oh, wow.
I was like, no. I was like, please, no. Like, don't book that. And I was like, we played a nice church, didn't we? And he was like, oh yeah, Cult Temple. I was like, yeah, how big's that? And he was like, oh, that's way too small. And I was like, no, let's book that one. Like, I'd rather book a small venue and sell it out and it feel really good than book a massive venue. Like, even if you book a massive venue and it's like 2/3 sold out, I think you still feel as if you've like overestimated yourself to a degree, right? And because, like I said, this is the first time back, we had no, especially booking the shows way before the announcement or anything, like we had no real read on how any of this was going to go. I was like, I really don't want to book a big place out and then nobody shows up, because I will literally just disappear off the face of the earth. I was like, the earth will actually swallow me whole and you will never hear from me again. So yeah, that's how we landed up with, like, I think the venue strike a nice balance. Like, Rebellion we played before when we were on the final tour. We headlined Rebellion. We've never played the Fleece. That's the biggest venue we've ever played in Bristol, right, but not by a massive amount. And then the Garage is the biggest venue we've ever played in London as a headline band. But again, I think it's only 100 bigger than the Dome that we played on the final tour. So like, the label were pushing us to go bigger, and we were very much pushing back against it, being like, we'll go a little bit bigger than we did on the final tour, but then, like, if these goes badly, I'm going to say I told you so.
Yeah. Well, I guess you want to ease yourself into it as well. Like I say, 3-4 years away from doing Casey at all, and you like I say, you guys have all been doing like adult jobs and
oh yeah. So this is one, like, a part of that practice. The first practice that we had back together in September, that was the first time I'd shouted in 3.5 years. My God, it was bad. Like, yeah. When I went into it just sort of like, it's very complacent, very, I've done this a million times before. It'll come back. It's like riding a bike. Yeah. Like, it'll come back to me. It'll be fine. And it did not come back to me at all.
No. Autopilot did not work.
Yeah, no, I was like, I'm going to have to really put the work in here to make sure these shows aren't awful.
Yeah, because you want to make sure you sound good and also not hurt yourself, not damage your voice.
Oh, God. You might have seen the video of Adam Lazara that's been doing the rounds at the minute.
Which one? There's been loads.
Oh God! I mean, I've only seen one, but it's the one where it's. I think it was like TikTok or something, where someone was like, "I waited 20 years to watch Taking Back Sunday," and it's a video of them, and I was like, "Holy hell, that's gonna be me!" I was like, oh God, that's what I'm gonna sound like. But yeah, there was definitely, after that first practice, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, to be honest, because like, before that first, after we'd had all these conversations and we decided we were going to do it again, everyone was like super pumped. We were like, yep, let's get into a room together and let's start playing some songs. And then we go in a room and we sounded awful. And I was like, oh my God, this is a mistake. This is going to go so bad. And then we did another couple of practices and it sounded really good again. We were like, sick. And then we were getting close to show announcement. And then that overwhelming dread of, oh my God, what if no one shows up, comes back. And then obviously then the announce came, and then we had a lot of really like nice and positive interactions with people and a lot of encouragement. So it's been up and down for quite a while. Yeah.
But you still got loads of monthly listeners on Spotify, which means that people still care, even when you've been away for nearly half a decade.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that Hassel pointed out when we came back to having conversations with them. And we mentioned that we were going to start playing shows again, and sort of aired our concerns around, what our performance was going to be like and sort of how many people were going to show up and all this sorts of stuff. One of the things they pointed out, they were like, well, you guys haven't been a band for 3.5 years. And in that amount of time, you've only lost about 15% of your monthly listeners. And they said, they've had other bands on the label that have come and gone. And they were like, it drops off much quicker than that for other artists. They were like, the retention rate of your fan base is much, much higher than most. And they were like, we're pretty confident that as soon as the announcement goes up, people are going to be excited about it. And fortunately, people were excited. So that's nice.
Definitely reassuring for you, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh my God. Like I said, the 72 hours leading up to the announcement of the shows, and then the actual morning of, where I was just like sat by my PC, just refreshing all of our social pages, like waiting to like update the images and stuff. And I was just like, oh my God, like what if this goes awfully? Like what if this is really bad? And then like the relief, like the weight that was lifted over the 3 hours immediately after, and then because I was in work all day. It came to like just before midday, and my boss was like, "You seem really, really distracted." And then she knows what's going on. Like my boss is super chill. I get on really, really well with her, and so I just like let her in on it. And she was just like, "Why did you just have the day off?" And I was like, "No, because I've got work stuff that I need to be doing, but like I also need to get this out of the way, and I need to make sure that everything goes well." And like I've always been very like, I don't know whether motherly is the right word, but like very like busybody, very like I'll be the one like flicking through our social tabs and just like refreshing every 2 seconds to make sure that like no one's kicking off, or like no one's like a moderator is probably better than motherly. But I was just doing that, and then she was like, "You're gonna get nothing done." She was like, "If you're gonna be doing this all day," she's like, "you might as well just take the day out and then promise me that you're gonna come back in tomorrow and not be like this." And I was just like, "No, I'll stay and work. I'll do as much as I can, because if I miss half a day's work, then I know I'm just gonna have to do a day and a half's work tomorrow."
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, like I said, it went really well. It was really nice.
Did the because I know you had the mailing list open a little bit beforehand, and you got quite a lot of people subscribing to that. Did that not kind of ease the nerves a little bit?
Yeah, there was a degree of that for sure. Like, so we really started pushing towards the mailing list on the Monday prior to the announce, and at that point, so we have a CRM guy that deals with our mailing list, like outside of the band and outside of the label. His name's Paul, and we were speaking to him, and we were like, "Look, what does our mailing list look like at the moment?" Because obviously, again, we hadn't spoken to these people. Like, we hadn't sent a mail out in 3.5 years. So, like, I think the last time that we emailed them was when Hassel did the 15 over 15.
The vinyl repress thing.
Yeah, when they did the repress of Love Is Not Enough. I'm pretty sure that was the last time that we emailed anybody. So we didn't know how many of them were still valid, how many people still checked those emails, how many people wanted to still be on the list. And so when was that? That was October 2020. So 2 and a bit years since the last time that they'd received an email from us about anything. And even the last time, it wasn't any real news. It was just, our label are repressing our vinyl. You can pick one up if you want, So it'd been a long time, and we didn't know how many of those people were still active. So we were speaking to Paul, and he was like, right, well, I think he said that we had just under 3,000 people on the list. And that was up, like, refreshed, up to date. We pulled in all of the new additions from Bandcamp, because you could still sign up to the main list through Bandcamp. And he was like, we've got about 3,000. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty solid start. Let's work with that. And then I was like, well, as of the Monday, we'll start driving people to it, and we'll see how much we do between then and the announce. And we had something like 5,000 signups in like 3 and a bit days.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Which was like, it's sort of weird, because like, again, I think this is the point at which I do understand that I probably am a bit of a pessimist. But like, when the label were talking to us about it, and they were just like, yeah, like 5,000 signups in 3 days is incredible. Like, that's so good. And I was like, but you have to tell us that, because we owe you a lot of money. You have to be nice to me. You're just saying that because I'll kick off if you don't. Like, so there's always that sort of level of trepidation or like uncertainty in the back of my head, where it's like, are you just telling me that because you have to tell me that? Or are you telling me that because you genuinely believe it?
It's caution. That's what it is.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think it is over caution to a degree, for sure. But like, even though saying it out loud, it makes perfect sense. I was like, yes, because we didn't have a mailing list like when we first started the band. I think we started it after about 18 months. But even then, so it's like in 3.5 years plus the 3.5 years we got. So 7 years. In 7 years, we got 3,000. And then in 3 days, we got 5,000.
Yeah.
So if I say it like that, it makes perfect sense that that's like really good.
Yeah, mathematically, it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm going to break that down over number of signups per day, you know, it is like a miraculously large. It's more than 1,000 signups a day versus less than 10. But even then, I was just like, nah, you've got to tell me that. Like, but yeah, so like that, there was an element of that being reassuring. But I mean, like you still don't know what people like, where people's expectations are. Right. So this is technically what my job is now, is customer experience management. So like expectation setting and like proper communication and all that sort of thing is what I do for a living. But like, even with all that number of signups, even with that much potential interest or like engagement, people might have been like, oh, it's not a new album. It's not in my country. I'm not going to make one of those shows. I don't give a shit. Fuck you. You know, like
that's the way people are though. Like if you're not playing
exactly.
a show 10 minutes down the road, it's too far for them and they complain.
Yeah. Oh, what, you haven't written an entire new album? You're not releasing it today? No, like, I don't care anymore. I'm going to unsubscribe. You know, so like I think again, because part of my job is like to sort of like disaster model, right? To be like, if we make this decision and we communicate it to our audience, what is the worst possible thing that could happen? And what do we do as a contingency for that? And then I just drag that into my personal life where I'm like, what if we put this email out? No one gives a shit. And then
they all unsubscribe.
Yeah. And we've got 6 venues booked that we can't fill. What then? But you know, obviously it hasn't come to that, which is nice. But yeah, it did in a way. It was like, you know, it's encouraging for sure. Like it didn't feel as intimidating as it did prior to that happening. And then obviously with the announce itself, that sort of like satisfied that doubt more, and it's only built from there.
Well, that's good. So when, I mean, you mentioned it before, but when did how did the kind of the reforming of you guys happen? So were all the other guys already writing music and then they approached you after that, or what was it?
Yeah, that was exactly it. So I don't know how far back they've been playing around with stuff. Toby did send me a snippet the other day of something that it was a video from a practice room from when they had been writing together, like with a date stamp on it.
Yeah, because I think wasn't Toby, because I know he still kind of like writes stuff, and didn't he tour with Holding Absence for a little bit as well, I think.
Yeah, he played guitar with Holding Absence for a little bit. He was also doing his own project called Sova, which is like a post-rock project. And he did a little bit of session writing, some other people. Liam did as well. Liam had done some session writing work for music for other bands. And then Adam had obviously started his own bands. He's in 2 other projects now alongside Casey. I think it was only me and Max that really didn't. He did for a little bit after Casey. He and Liam were in a band called Exit Dream for a little while. And he did some session drumming as well. Yeah, actually, to be fair, it was me. Like I just dropped off the grid. But yeah, I think they sort of came out together. It was a few months before they reached out to me, which I think after I found that out is when it felt more. I don't mean this with any negative connotation. It felt more targeted when Liam messaged me so soon after I'd gone through a breakup. I was like, this feels too coincidental to be a coincidence, you know? Like the timing of this is too apt. But it turned out, like I said, like there was no way he could have known. So it must have been coincidence. But yeah, they'd been call it fate.
Destiny.
Yeah. They'd been writing together for a little while. And I think they were toying around with the idea that they were going to release it instrumentally. And then as they were getting closer to being in a position to start recording, they were like, actually, we would rather just see if we can get the band back together and do it. I think like I've spoken briefly to them about it, and there was that trepidation around starting from scratch. And even though that you have that reputation behind you and, you know, the pedigree makes them sound like dogs, but you know, like the history behind the artist, right? You know, you can say you have the affiliation of, that's the word I'm looking for, is the affiliation, not pedigree. You know, when you have the affiliation behind you, say, oh, no. Although I think to a degree they'd want to escape that labeling. I think it's really like not disrespectful, but like it can feel a little bit limiting if you're labeled as like, oh, X so and so, right? Like if you were going to start a new project, if I was going to start anything new, I knew immediately it would be Tom Weaver X Casey, right?
Yeah, because the comparison isn't like, how does this pair up to the Casey stuff? And even if it's completely different, they'll say, oh, well, I like this better.
Exactly. It gives that immediate point of comparison, and it's like, it opens you up to that critique, right? And it's like, so I know that they had some like anxiety around that. But then obviously they reached out to me, and it wasn't like an immediate yes by any means. And like I said, there was no oh my God, like we need to do this. Like both from like a creative perspective and also just from like a business perspective, I suppose, because like to the level that we make music, although it's by no means big, like I wouldn't call us a big band by any degree, but there's still like an element of a business behind it, right? And it's like, can I commit to this? Am I going to be able to invest myself in this to the level whereby it will live up to the expectations that people will have with any return for this band? Because like there's no way that we could have come back and been like, oh yeah, we're just going to play 100 cap clubs and like, that's all we can commit to. We're going to do one show every 6 months. It's going to be in a really small venue and like it's going to annoy a load of people, right? So like we were like, if we're coming back, we have to do it to a degree where like it satisfies that expectation, but also then fits in line with our personal commitments and things. So like initially we were very like, is this the right thing to do? Are we all invested in this? Does this feel good? Are we all comfortable that this is going to be a positive experience for everybody and we're all going to be equally happy with how it's going? So yeah, there was a few weeks between that initial reach out where Liam messaged me and us sort of coming to the conclusion that actually, yeah, this is what we all want to do and we do all want to commit to it 100%.
Yeah, and like I say, you had those kind of difficult conversations, and I'm not saying to kind of pry into those conversations because that's completely private. But I guess there was a kind of like conversation between you, kind of maybe away from the band as well. Like I don't know if you had like any. Don't want to use the word conflict because that sounds very, very negative and argumentative. But like you say, just kind of not on the same page when the band broke up, and then you never really had the chance to talk about it. Really.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Like there was again, I put this in the mail out to our community ahead of us announcing the reunion, but there was that like a lingering discomfort that sort of like sat around the band like after the departure, because it went from being so all encompassing as part of our lives. And this is something that I really struggled with for the first few months after the breakup, actually. But it went from being something that was so totally absorbing, like so omnipresent for us, to being so absent. And it made it very, very evident how much we relied on it as part of like, not even just as a creative outlet, like that's sort of like the fundamental layer of being a musician, I suppose. But then there's like the social aspect of it where we were no longer able to travel as freely and we weren't hanging out with each other as much. And like these were the four people that I had spent the most amount of time with in my life over those 5 years. And like I said, like we weren't able to travel, like so then there was no social experience of meeting other people who were also kind of involved in the same scene with us. And then there's also like the personality side of it. Like I realized coming out of the band and then sort of entering into the real world when I was trying to like socialize in work and stuff, and when I was getting into a relationship, I realized how much of my personality was based on the fact that I was in a band. And I was literally like every conversation, it would be like, oh, I really like Germany, like, and I enjoy coffee. I'd be like, oh my God, like I've been to like this coffee shop in this city because I played this show. And they'd be like, shut up, man, I don't care. Like, and I was like, and then outside of that, I was like, oh my God, I have so few interests and I have so little to talk about. Like I'm such a vapid person. And that's what it felt like until, I realized that that's not really the case. I do think I'm quite boring, but like I found that they were
a simple person with a simple interest.
Yeah, I like to keep myself fairly reserved. I discovered that there's more to my life than being in a band. And again, like I said, Liam was already a father by the time that the band finished, but he had a second child. Max had a child shortly after the band broke up. Adam went on to make other bands and he went on to do other stuff in his personal life. He started learning luthiering, for example, like making guitars and stuff. And he's still super involved with that. Like I said, Toby settled down, bought a house and went through some real jobs and things. And, I think each of us in our own way had to acclimate to the idea that, we couldn't just rely on the band to be that social vessel for us that would sort of fulfill our hierarchy of needs in a way. When we came back together then, we were like, oh my God, we've all changed so much in 3 years. And then we were talking about like experiences that we shared together as a band prior to the breakup and realized that because we'd had so much time away from it, we were coming back to every experience that we'd had, we come back with a new perspective, right? Where maybe like we'd had a show that we didn't think was so great at the time, and then we were talking about it and we'd find other things to enjoy about the experience of being like, understanding how fortunate we were to even have been in that position, rather than just tunnel visioning on the fact that maybe, the guitar volumes were out, or like just something like something little that at the time that you really sort of like hyperfixate on. And it really gave us a fresh perspective on the music that we'd written as well. Like we're talking about sort of quite earnestly, quite like intimately about the reasons that the band had come to a close for each of us. And for me personally, as I mentioned in the closing statements, I was like, I no longer feel emotionally invested in the music that we've made, and it doesn't feel right to then just recycle that, or to sing the songs without any real interest in them, or on the same level that I had when I was writing them. And then over time, it was quite difficult for me to remove myself from that perspective, to kind of look at it from the idea that actually that's really quite self-absorbed. And because by that point I'd matured a lot, and I'd sort of emotionally dealt with things in a much more kind of thorough way, and like a much more constructive way.
Because I think you said in the like closing statement that some of those songs you wrote as I think your words were an angry, conflicted man, and you just didn't want to tie yourself emotionally and revisit those songs, what they're about. And I guess even though they were a catharsis for you, speaking about these experiences that you had with, relationships, mental health, well-being, whatever it may be, I guess there's still some kind of catharsis.
It comes at a price. It comes at a, like, it definitely felt as though, like I said, because I had that very single-minded, solipsistic perspective on things. I was very much in my head about it, thinking, this is how I feel about this immediate personal impact of what I'm doing right now. And it was after that had been taken away, like once I was no longer doing that for an extended period of time, and I could reflect on sort of the experience holistically, like trying to look at it from other perspectives and trying to reevaluate how it was that I felt about it and why I might have felt that way about it. And also, like, I spent a little bit of time speaking to some other musicians as well about this idea of, you've written about really quite elaborate and quite complex and traumatic experiences in your life, and yet you are comfortable reiterating them and regurgitating them night after night. Do you not feel a sense of anchoring? Do you not feel a sense that you are being, like I said, tied down to a particular period in your life that perhaps you feel as though personally you've moved on from? And a lot of them were in agreement. They're like, there is an element of that for sure. And I think it does paint you as perhaps still being, like, if you are capable of performing a song night after night that is about a particular experience, and you are performing it passionately or kind of in an invested manner, it paints you as still being very much tied to that period of your life. But they're like, that's not necessarily the case. You can do it just as a point of entertainment, with the perspective that that might still mean something on an intimate level to somebody who's listening. Mm-hmm. Like, just because you as the performer are comfortable with the fact that you've perhaps moved on from the period of, like, from what you were feeling at the time of writing, that doesn't necessarily mean that the listener isn't still very emotionally invested. And although there may be a level of discomfort in repeating the emotions and the situation that you were in, you have to balance that discomfort against, like you said, the catharsis or the kind of collective joy that you can produce as part of a performance or as part of just writing and releasing music.
Yeah, because some of the songs you wrote are, you mentioned yourself, kind of like traumatic personal experiences that you've had, and I can imagine that does kind of take a toll on yourself when you're performing these songs, most nights, and taking a toll on your mental health, kind of revisiting them, however small or big that may be. How are you kind of feeling, when you've been practicing these songs? Do you feel like now you're kind of in a better, I don't want to sound like a therapist, I'm not trying to be like that, but do you feel like you're kind of like in a better headspace to be able to kind of compartmentalize them a little bit?
I think it goes slightly the other way, to be honest. I think when I was in Casey initially, like when we were sort of getting to the point, sort of towards the end, there was a lot of compartmentalization going on, where to get through shows and to get through tours, I was trying to separate the art from the artist whilst being both, and needing to do that in order to not feel overwhelmed by what I was doing and not kind of succumb to that like permeance of my discomfort, for want of a better word. And it was then, like I said, after I took a step away from it and I could really reflect on everything that was going on, and also, like I said, work through what the roots of those songs were, really work through them in my personal life and really sort of get myself into a better place overall, and just deal with them in a more mature way and a more productive way. and then looking back on the songs and being like, oh, actually, no, I don't feel like that at all anymore. And and then just that was a kind of a staged process in coming back to the band, because it was like, oh, you know, I've got to perform this song and I actually don't think this, like, I don't think this way anymore. I don't feel this way anymore. I suppose similar to how Hayley Williams feels about Misery Business, right? Where like they stopped playing it for ages because of like she felt it had a misogynistic connotation to it, and then sort of just making peace with that, and then coming back to it and thinking, actually, you know, that's not really how I feel about this anymore. But it has a there is an entertainment value to it, or there is a therapeutic value to it that can be experienced by the audience, and I need to, like I said, find that balance between, am I comfortable in being somebody who is perpetuating a story that I am no longer perhaps personally invested in, versus how much catharsis or how much kind of joy is this able to create for like how therapeutic is this going to be to somebody who really needs it right now, and then coming to the conclusion that actually, you know, the pros outweigh the cons.
And how are you feeling, you know, because we mentioned like rehearsing those songs and revisited them. How have the rehearsals been going, and how are you feeling about returning to the stage?
I mean, performing was always a necessary evil for me at the best of times. I'm actually a really bad musician. Like, I don't particularly enjoy recording. I don't particularly enjoy playing live. I just like writing songs. But there's definitely like within the Casey camp, definitely like a level of positivity around it. It's the first time, it also feels more professional now, because it's the first time that we've ever had an in-ear monitoring system.
Okay.
So like we're coming back to it, and we're just like, we're a real band now.
Coming back
like,
full force this time.
Yeah. No, we're bigger and better than ever. But there's definitely like a level of sort of like cohesiveness to us, and like a level of sort of mutual support for everybody. Because I think at one point or another, all of us have sort of had that, oh, like, what if I'm not very good moment? You know, like throughout the practices or whatever, like we'll be playing, like even down as far as little things where like, I don't know, like a pedal on Liam's board will be making a weird noise or something. And he's like, what if this happens in front of 1,000 people? And then he just has a panic about it. And we're just like, it'll be fine, man. Like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Like down as little, like as far as little things like that. Or if like we miss a fill, or like, you know, we forget a note and it sounds really weird, and it's like, we'll get through it. Like, don't worry about it. You know, it's not like we were a band that gave 5 years of perfect performances prior to breaking up, right? The last London show, so we played 2 nights at the Dome. When we broke up, we did Love Is Not Enough the first night, we did Where I Go When I Was Sleeping the second night, plus the peripheral singles. And on the second night, when we played Little Bird, it is the only time that we played it in 5 years that I forgot the words.
I imagine that's a song that since it kind of came out, you've played it pretty much every
hundreds of times. Yeah, it's been in the set ever since we wrote it. And I forgot the words and just totally messed up. And I just laughed. Like there's a photo of me, like the Martina sent us, and I just turned around because I came in way too late or something, or way too early. I finished the lines way too early, and then I turned around and I was just laughing because I was just like, I don't know where I am. I can't remember the words, and like there's nothing I can do about it now because it's done. And it's you know, it's not as if we gave like hundreds of flawless performances. There's always going to be that like organic element to it, which I think that we've kind of benefited from as much as it's hindered us. You know, we've never been a band that's been super harsh on ourselves about that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you're perfectionist, are you? Because I've seen you quite a few times. I think one example, I think it was Ghost Fest. I mean, this is going back a bit now. Ghost Fest 20.
It was the final Ghost Fest. I know that.
Yeah, and you know, you climbed over the barrier and you're in the middle of the crowd with, you know, you're on the floor with the microphone, and you know, like you say, it's kind of organic, it's natural, it's human. It's not like you go into a click. Everything has to be exactly the same on every single bar. Yeah.
Although saying that, we are now actually going to be on a click, and it is going to be
with the in-ear monitors.
Yeah. We are going to be a pop band now. So
yeah. You guys have released your first new song since the breakup, since coming back, Great Grief. When did that song start coming together?
Yeah, so Great Grief, I mean, this is quite apt timing, I suppose, because a lot of what the song is about is what I've literally just been talking about, like that sort of mental struggle of like, how do I really feel about all of this? Like, how do I feel about coming back to music? Am I comfortable with singing these songs again? And like, is there any residual guilt about performing them without being emotionally invested as I was? Or am I prepared for any level of discomfort that might arise? Like, how do I satisfy that in a sense of how can I justify it to myself that I should be doing this again, and like that any pain or any kind of discomfort that I'm feeling is worth it, and sort of making sure that, as I mentioned before, that this is going to be sustainable, that we're going to do this in a way that we're not going to perform together for 6 months, feel emotionally devastated by it, and then just disappear again for 4 years, right? Yeah. That is not the goal. But it started coming together as a piece of music. It was one of the bits that the other guys had been playing around with for a while, and it was sort of most of the way finished by the time they messaged me. It was the first demo that they sent when they were like, look, we've been playing around with something. How do you feel about this? And between then and us actually recording it, it definitely matured and it definitely expanded quite a lot. But it was one of those things that, like, when Liam sent me through the demo, I listened to it in the car and I was like, this is a Casey song. Because the weird thing is, we'd never demoed music before, right? Pre-recording for both Love Is Not Enough and Where I Go and I'm Sleeping, probably less than 5 Casey demos total existed. We'd always just gone into a practice room, written songs together, and then we would have very skeletal ideas of what we wanted to produce. We would take that into the recording studio that we were making our records at, and then we would just flesh them out on the go. Like, this really stressed. So when we did Where I Go When I'm Sleeping, we wrote, recorded, and produced it ourselves. It was mixed and mastered elsewhere, but like Toby just spent like 4 weeks camping in a studio, and like the rest of us would just sort of drop in and out to do our bits and pieces. But he was there like all night, all day, just over quite an extended period of time to get it to where it was. Whereas with Where I Go When I'm Sleeping, we recorded it at like a professional studio, and we flew Brad Wood over from California to produce it for us. And we had a very, very finite amount of time to do anything with. And when we got to the studio, we had 14 days of recording, and we had 1 pre-production day before any of that kicked off. And when we got there for the pre-pro day with Brad, he was like, right, set everything up in the live room. Let's get everyone in there together. We're just going to play through the album, and I'm going to just sit in and I'm going to listen to it organically, and we'll make some notes, and, we'll sketch out a plan for how we can best produce this together. And we played like 2.5 songs, no vocal, really sloppy, and then stopped. And he was just like, what's going on? I was like, well, I've not written any lyrics yet, and that's as much music as we've got written. And he was just like, you've got 2 weeks to record this record, and you've written 2.5 out of 12 songs. And we were like, yeah, I'll be fine. Don't worry about it. We sort of know what we're doing. It's just in our heads at the minute. We'll just write it as we're going. And he was just like, no. Like, and then, so this was by about lunchtime. And he was like, I'm going to go to the pub, or I'm going to go to like my room, because we had accommodation at the studio. And he's like, I'm going to go to my room. I'm going to have a beer. And in like 4 hours, I'm going to come back. And you need to have evidence to me that you are capable of writing this quantity of music to a good standard within a short space of time, or I'm not doing this record with you. And we were like, all right, like, don't worry about it. It's fine. So he went off and he came back, and we'd done like an extra 2.5 songs or something in that time that were like sort of most of like 90% of the way there. And he was just like, okay, fine. He was like, we're going to start recording at 10 a.m. every day. We're going to finish recording at 6 p.m. And he's like, and then 6 p.m. until probably midnight, you guys are going to have to stay in here and just write music. And that's what we did. But I didn't start writing the lyrics to that record until probably day 10.
2 weeks, so with 4 days left.
Yeah. And every day, Brad would come into the lounge area of the studio, and I would be sat in my pajamas playing Half-Life 2 on the Xbox 360. And he'd be like, anything for me? And I would just be like, no. And he's like, you're gonna write anything today? And I was like, well, the songs aren't completely finished yet, and I never write anything until I have a totally finished structure and I know exactly what a song is doing. So like, and as soon as you can send me all the MP3s, just do that, and then I'll go upstairs and I'll just sit down and I'll write the record. And he was like, all right, dude, like, if like, he said, everyone else is doing a really great job. He's like, I'm really like impressed by how much they've like kept to their word, and like, they're really getting it done in there. And he's like, it's going to be a real shame if this complacency is the downfall of this band. And I was like, don't worry about it, man. Like, it'll be fine. It's like, don't stress. I think, it was the evening of day 10, I think he came back to me and he was like, right, I've just sent you an email. It has a Dropbox folder of bounces for all the songs that we have decided are on the record. He's like, please go and write something. He said, just show me anything. He said, again, if we've got to do it 3 or 4 songs at a time, and you can just get that done for me as quickly as possible. And I was like, okay, cool. Don't worry about it. And then I went upstairs, and I think like 3 hours later, I came back down and I'd written the whole record.
Wow.
And he was like annoyed initially, because he was just like, you're taking the piss. He's like, you had this done all the time, didn't you? Like, this isn't something you've just done. And I was like, well, the songs weren't even written. Like, there's no way I could have done this before now, because I haven't been in the live room with you to hear the songs coming together and write as I'm going. And this is the first time you sent me the MP3, so I had to have done. And he was just like, "You're such an asshole." And then we got to the end of the recording process, and obviously we finished the record in time. We had time left over, in fact. And Brad was like, "I've absolutely loved working with you, but I will never do it again." Which strictly isn't true, because after the fact, we did speak to him, and he was like, "I would do another record with you." But like in the moment, he was just like, "I can't believe that you."
So you were temporarily blacklisted, basically.
Yeah, he was like, "I can't believe you pulled this off." But then going into recording Great Grief, like I said, it was the first time that I'd been sent a completely fleshed out total song demo. It was like over 4 minutes of music. And I was just like, oh, wow. Like, and it sounded great as well. Like, everything, Toby's been demoing everything, and he's been producing all of our new music and recording it in his house. And it sounded awesome. And I was just like, oh my God, like, this is a Casey song. Like, this is great. And then when I sat down to start writing it, I had writer's block for probably like 3 or 4 days, maybe. And I was sat there, and nothing would come to me. And I was getting really stressed out about it, and really in my head. And I was just like, oh my God, what if I can't write anything anymore? What if I've got nothing to talk about? What if, because I've always held myself to a certain standard, I think. And I like to write, and I like to read like interesting things. I find it really difficult to, and I think this is as much a hindrance as it is a positive attribute. But I really struggle to simplify things. I really struggle to write things in their most basic form. And this is something I struggle with both creatively and professionally as well. I'm really bad for it in work. And I was just like, what if I've got nothing to say? What if I can't write in the same way I used to? And again, there's like, I was then getting my head about like the level of expectation that people would have if I were to return to writing songs and they read nothing like the songs that I'd written previously. How would people respond to that? How would people react?
Yeah, especially because over that time you're a different person now. So
exactly. So I was like, what, this could go really badly. And then all of a sudden, I think I was just like, I was in the shower one day or something. And this is something that I used to do a lot, like where I'd be just walking around my house or something, and just a single word would come to me. And it might be a word that I know I can say, like I know the pronunciation of, and like I've heard before, but I don't really know the definition of. And I was in the shower, chilling, singing songs.
Chilling in the shower,
yeah, as people do, just singing other people's music. And then the word elucidated came to me, and I was like, that's a really nice word. Like, I really like the way that sounds. And I was like, I'm gonna go upstairs and I'm gonna Google what elucidated means. And then I found out that elucidated means it's just a fancy way of saying clarified. It's more of a I think it's more of a catering term than anything, really. Like, if you elucidate something, you like clarify it. Like, you use egg white to elucidate stock. Right. And I was like, that's such a nice word. And then it just grew around that. And like, I wrote a sentence. And then when I started, like, after I got to the end of a sentence, I was like, oh, I know like what I can say before that. Because again, like, I never write front to back. I never start at the start and end at the end. I always start somewhere in the middle and then just proliferate around it. So like, I started somewhere toward the end of the first verse, and then I just wrote outwards in a spiral from there, and added to it. Once I was in the mindset of writing again, and once I was like comfortable with my subject matter and I knew what I wanted to say, it came together really quickly. And it's also the first time that I've demoed vocals in my house. Didn't demo the screams because I didn't want to upset my parents. But like yeah, like the first time I've demoed any singing. And as I was doing it, I was messaging Toby, and I was like, look, I want to try and like be a bit more adventurous with the singing, because I've always been very like soft spoken. I've always sung within a very comfortable range. I've never really been bold enough to like record anything that is pushing myself, really. I suppose the exception potentially is the chorus of Phosphines. But even then, like, looking back at it, that was only challenging at the time because of how unprepared I was going into the recording of it. Because this is like the major problem I used to come up against was, although I was always able to come out with an end product, I was always able to sit down under the gun and write something under pressure. It would mean that I would write it with a single melody in mind, and then that would have to be what I committed to, because there was no time to do anything else. So with this time round, because I was writing so far in advance, like, me and Toby were able to go back and forth, and I was able to like I said, demo a vocal melody and be like, what do you think about this? Do you think I should be doing anything differently? Because he's a way better singer than I am. So is Liam as well. But like, the pair of them, like, have been absolutely instrumental in how the vocals have come out on this. And like really like pushing and refining it to get to an end point where I'm like, oh, this is, it sounds as if I haven't just taken 3.5 years off and I've come back in a position of complacency and I've recorded the first thing that comes to my head. It sounds a little bit better than, and I think that, I think it's reflected in the recording, right? Like we've come out at the end of it and I'm comfortable that this is, to me, I believe that it is objectively the best music that Casey's ever written. And I know every band always says that about every record. I get it, but I do genuinely believe that.
It is a very cliche saying, but I've heard it a good few times. Like the song is great, and you mentioned it yourself. You can definitely tell like your vocal ability has not only improved, but you're trying things that you've not necessarily tried on the previous material. And like sonically, to me, it kind of sounds like something that would sit between those two albums. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, to a degree. Like we put a lot more effort into like sound design as well. So this is something that Toby was really passionate about, and it was part of what led him to his project Sova. It's just like very detailed layering of sounds, very detailed, like very complementary layers amongst that as well. And so as we were recording, he would be like, I'm going to put a bit crunched sub bass underneath that. And I'd be like, dude, that makes no sense to me. Like I've got no idea what you're talking about. And he'd be like, oh, you won't even be able to hear it, but if you take it away, you'll think that something's missing. And I was like, okay, fair. Like what you're talking about. Again,
yeah, trust him.
Yeah, you're a far better musician than I am. Like I'm in no position to question you on this. You do you. And he was right. Like there are definitely parts of it that if you put it on full blast to a powerful set of speakers, it sounds massive. And I think it sounds a lot bigger than anything that we've ever written. Like the first chorus leading into the middle eight, when it first like drops out and it goes to like halftime. There's a layer somewhere sitting towards the bottom, which is called the Destruction of Erdank or something. It was like the name of the plugin or the name of the setting or something. And it, like, if you listen to it in isolation, it sounds insane. It's just noise. Yeah. But then when you put everything else over the top of it, that noise sort of dissipates and it just blends into the background and just like makes it sound thicker than it had before. And if you take it away, it sounds like something's missing. But it's very difficult to pick it out as an individual layer. But there's a few bits and pieces like that. And I think that, like I said, sonically, I think that it is objectively the best music that Casey's ever written. I think lyrically, and I think that emotionally, it's going to mean very different things to different people. Right? I think that because of the nature of the band that we were, the band that we still are, I think every record has the potential to hold incredibly like a very intimate sentimentality to like on an individual level, to the point where like we are going to be that kind of band where it's quite possible that you will very, very much enjoy 3 songs of one record and then fucking hate the rest of it, right? But that's fine. But those 3 songs will be your 3 favorite songs for life because like you relate to them so hard. But then they're going to be like you listen to Little Bird, right? And you listen to Hell, and you listen to Teeth, and you listen to those 3 songs on repeat for the rest of your life because you're still tragically in love with a girl that you met when you were 15. And then you listen to like Phosphenes and Fluorescence, which are about me losing a load of body weight through colitis, and you're just like, I can't relate to this, which is totally fine. It's just like, because it's always been such a personal endeavor for me, and I've talked about everything that's happened in my life, and I don't expect people to relate to absolutely everything in my life, because then my life would be the Truman Show. So like, I think Great Grief, major purpose of it was that we wanted it to be an appropriate reintroduction to the band. We wanted to make sure that we were writing something that was anchored in the familiar. It didn't sound, we weren't going to come back out with like a fucking Clubland song or anything, we weren't going EDM. Yeah, and conversely, we weren't going to go like death metal, we weren't going to go on tour with fucking Knocked Loose or anything. Not that there's anything wrong with Knocked Loose, I very much enjoy them. But we weren't going to drastically change demographic, right? We wanted to come back with the reassurance that like, because we've seen a lot of bands do that as well, right? Well, they'll go away for a long time, or they'll, between 2 bodies of work, they'll change quite drastically, and it can feel really ostracizing and really alienating to a fan base, which is something that we wanted to avoid quite actively, whilst also not pigeonholing ourselves to being the band that wrote Little Bird, right? We wanted to make sure that we were demonstrating a level of personal growth and like musical growth, whilst also not it being so much of a departure that people are going to be like, what the fuck is this? And yeah, I think lyrically that was something I wanted to encapsulate. It was, like I said, it took me a little while to get back into the flow of writing, but then when I did, it was very much about that. And this came about through conversations with the rest of the band as well, where I was expressing that anxiety or that sort of personal conflict around how do I actually feel about this? Am I comfortable with it? If I'm going to do it, is it going to be really detrimental for me personally? Like I said, am I going to just flame out again or anything like that? And then it got to the point where I was like, actually, this is probably quite good subject matter for writing about.
Yeah.
And I think that part of it came about as well because I was like, oh, you know, there was a conversation when we were practicing. That was it, where I was like, oh, I'm probably going to have to do a statement at some point which explains what has changed for me personally between that final statement and us coming back that means that I now feel comfortable doing this again. And I was like, well, rather than doing that, why don't I just write a song about it? So that's sort of like where the bones of it came from. And then it was just about fleshing that out and sort of writing about it. But I think that the middle eight sort of encapsulates the sentiment of the song quite well. And it's a line that we've repeated across our socials as well, where it's like, what is the worth of a misery if not experienced in jovial company, right? It's like, what's the point in me thinking about these periods of my life or having this catalog of work that is like very graphic about my depression and my illnesses and my emotional devastations and all this, if I can't then share that with a room full of people that can find some level of therapy or catharsis or joy from it, you know? And that was like, yeah, that was the fundamentality of it.
And you mentioned very briefly like that there's other new music. Is that right? Are we looking at, is this a standalone single? Is it going to be an EP, an album, or are you kind of wanting to kind of stay quiet on what's going on there?
What I will say is this isn't the only song that we've recorded at the moment. It's not an album right now. I think that's a fair way to put it. I think that we have more than one finished song recorded, but right now we have no immediate plans to release an album. But like I said, like we're coming back to this, like we're thinking longer term about the band, you know, with it, like, and again, that comes from a place of needing to coordinate around our personal lives. Some of us are on January to January work holidays, and some of us are on April to April. So we need to make sure that all of us have the same amount of holiday available to play shows and things. And then also from the sense that, like, as I've been saying, we don't want this to be just a come back, play 5 shows, hate it, disappear again. Like we're thinking, we want to be doing this for another couple of years with each other, you know, and everything, it will run its course, right? I don't think that it's like, particularly in alternative music, there are very, very few people that transcend that to the point where this becomes a career, like a career hobby, and it means that we can live off this. I am under no delusion that I don't think Casey will ever get to that point, but we will continue doing it in the way that, to the best of our ability, until we absolutely have to say, actually, this isn't feasible anymore. This isn't sustainable. And I think that we'll likely get to a point where it'll be similar to where we were previously, because when we broke up when we played our final show in 2019, that was the biggest the band had ever been. So it wasn't as if like we'd gone over the hump, we were on a decline, and we thought, let's fucking bail out before this crashes into the ground, right? And I think we've always been quite honest with ourselves about that idea, whereby we don't want to get to a peak and then watch ourselves fall off and be like, oh, remember when we used to play venues that were like twice this big? Or like, you know, remember we used to like really enjoy doing this because it felt really fun, and now like we fucking hate it. I think we'd want to step away from it before we reach that point. But we don't see that coming anytime soon. I think is the point that I'm trying to make. Right. Like, so we'll be working on new music. We will be recording new music, and you know, if we write enough songs to put a record together that we think is cohesive and we think that it is adequate, sounds so undersold. If we think that is
album,
if we think that is if we think that it's bare minimum, no, like if we think that it is an exceptional body of work, then we'll record a record and we'll put a record out. But like, I think that part of that realism and part of that, like the expectation setting that we've had amongst ourselves, is that we don't want to pressurize that. We don't want to feel as though we need to write a new record. Like, oh my God, the eyes of the world are on us or anything, because they're not. The eyes of 1,500 people on Twitter might be on us, but like, my boss doesn't give a shit if I write a new record or not. She just wants me to do my job, right? So like, we'll keep writing and we'll see how it goes. And if we think that we write something that lives up to the standards that we have to ourselves, then we'll record it and we'll put a record out. But right now, this isn't the only single that we will release in the immediate future, but I'm not divulging anything longer term.
That seems fair enough. Yeah, it all sounds really, really exciting, Tom, and I really appreciate you taking the time out. I'm glad to hear that, you know, you're all on good terms, everything's going great, you've got these new shows coming up, new music's on the horizon. It all sounds really, really cool. Before I let you go and enjoy the rest of your evening, is there any final words, anything you want to say that we've not talked about yet? The floor is yours.
I'm always awful at this ending part of a conversation. I suppose, like, I want to express my gratitude for the response that we've had in our return. like I said, there was a lot of trepidation, a lot of anxiety around the potential for this to go very, very badly. And it hasn't. And people have been really nice about it. So I would like to say thank you to anyone that has taken the time to be very complimentary and very supportive and encouraging in our return. But yeah, outside of that, you see people in January that can make the shows.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Tom, again. Speak soon.
Yeah, see you, mate.
See you later, man. Bye.
And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider supporting the podcast in any way that you can. We have a Patreon where you can get access to each episode a week early, along with some other perks, a merch store, or you can leave a review wherever you're listening to this. You can also follow me on social media or subscribe to the newsletter where I'll send out each episode to you via email, along with regular playlists. All this can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and remember, it's not a phase, it's a lifestyle.